It seems like almost yesterday that I stood here after midnight at the beginning of Christmas Day and spoke to you about the depth, the richness of our hymn, Silent Night. It does seem to me almost like yesterday. Here we are at Palm Sunday, and we're listening at the beginning of Holy Week to the story of our Lord's suffering and death. That night when he was condemned to death. And that night was anything but a silent night. That night was contaminated by the sounds of violent hatred for Jesus Christ. Violent hatred is always noisy. We see that in many of the protests in our own country, which have taken up the sounds, not of silence, as the song says, but of violent hatred. And yet, there were some crucial silent elements in that very noisy, violent night when Jesus was crucified. The thoughts of Judas as he carried out his betrayal plan. Those thoughts were held in silence and in darkness. We've been talking a lot about how silence unveils the mysteries of goodness, truth, and love. Silence like a veil. Silence also can be turned on its head by the devil and become the place where violence and hatred are plotted in the workings of human minds and human hearts. God created silence to reveal mystery and glory. The devil, of course, does everything he can to abuse God's creation, and so silence becomes the unveiling of evil. But that, too, is a very good thing, because human beings need to face up to the truth about evil and about Satan. And they don't want to do that. Pontius Pilate had his moment of silence too. What his wife had told him frightened him very much. And he was hesitant to do what the people wanted. But rather than follow his own conviction and his own rightful fear, he did what politicians often do. He looked at the results of the poll. And the results of the poll that he or she doesn't like this idea of polling either. And she's learned this at a very young age. The rest of us should take that for an example. He heard the results of the poll. Let him be crucified. And he went along. And what did he think as he washed his hands? Did he really think that that made any difference? Or was it some kind of a politically correct cover-up in his own mind? And then, of course, we have the silence which enveloped the thoughts of Jesus as he died, the silence that we just commemorated here. Right after he died, when Jesus descended to the dead to rescue all the great saints of the Old Testament who were imprisoned in the place of the dead, to be saved, to await the resurrection. What did Jesus think, having just cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Seeing himself now as the liberator of that great company of prophets and saints from the Old Testament. Imagine how happy St. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were to see Jesus. St. David, too. Just imagine that. And St. Deborah and St. Esther. Just imagine how happy they were that their liberator was at hand. But as far as this world was concerned, that mystery was veiled in silence. And the unveilings in the Passion account, the unveilings are interesting too. The high priest tore his garments. He unveiled so that everybody could see how evil is. His blood be upon us and our children. The unveiling of evil accomplishes a good. It shows us how evil is. And then, so importantly, we have the veil in the temple torn in two. We learn in the letter to the Hebrews that the veil spoken of in that story is the flesh of Jesus. In having the veil which is his flesh torn in two, the mystery and the glory of heaven were revealed. The gateway to the sanctuary was opened by the tearing open of the veil. And silence is necessary to contemplate the torn garments of the high priest revealing evil, and the torn veil in the temple revealing God's glory. I would suggest to you that so many of the important moments in the Scriptures required silence, as in Judas, as in Pilate, as in Jesus. And I would also submit that silence is so important so that those veils can be removed and we can see the true evil and hatred and violence of evil and so that we can see the truth and the beauty and the goodness of the mystery of Christ. As much as we can, let's try to have a silent Holy Week. Praise be Jesus Christ.